the second day of the debate, our friend Weston clothes his old assertions in new forms. He said, consequent upon a general rise in money wages, more currency will be wanted to pay the same wages. The currency being fixed, how can you pay with this fixed currency increased money wages? The first difficulty arose from the fixed amount of commodities accruing to the working man, despite his increase of money wages. Now it arises from the increased money wages despite the fixed amount of commodities. Of course, if you reject his original dogma, his second grievance will disappear. However, I shall show that this currency question has nothing at all to do with the subject before us. In your country, the mechanism of payments is much more perfected than any other country in Europe. Thanks to the extent and concentration of the banking system, much less currency is wanted to circulate the same amount of values and to transact the same or greater amount of business. For example, as far as wages are concerned, the English factory operative pays his wages weekly to the shopkeeper, who sends them weekly to the banker, who returns them weekly to the manufacturer, who again pays them away to his workingmen, and so forth. By this contrivance, the yearly wages of an operative, say of £52, may be paid by one single sovereign, turning round every week in the same circle. Even in England, the mechanism is less perfect than in Scotland, and it is not everywhere equally perfect, and therefore we find, for example, that in some agricultural districts, more currency is wanted to circulate a much smaller amount of values. If you cross the Channel, you will find that the money wages are much lower than in England, but they are circulated in Germany, Italy, Switzerland, and France by a much larger amount of currency. The same sovereign will not be so quickly intercepted by the banker or returned to the industrial capitalist, and therefore, instead of one sovereign circulating £52 yearly, you want perhaps 3 sovereigns to circulate yearly wages to the amount of £25. Thus, by comparing the continental countries with England, you will see at once that low money wages may require a much larger currency for their circulation than high money wages, and that this is, in fact, merely a technical point, quite foreign to our subject. According to the best calculations I know, the yearly income of the working class of this country may be estimated at £250 million. This immense sum is circulated by about £3 million. Suppose a rise of wages of 50% to take place. Then, instead of this 3 millions of currency, 4.5 millions would be wanted. As a very considerable part of the working man's daily expenses is laid out in silver and copper, that is to say, in mere tokens, whose relative value to gold is arbitrarily fixed by law, like that of incontrovertible money paper, a rise of money wages by 50% would, in the extreme case, require an additional circulation of sovereigns, say, to the amount of 1 million. 1 million now dormant in the shape of bullion or gold in the cellars of the Bank of England or of private bankers would circulate. But even the trifling expense resulting from the additional minting or additional wear and tear of that million might be spared, and would actually be spared if any friction should arise from the want of the additional currency. All of you know that the currency of this country is divided into 2 great departments. One sort, supplied by banknotes of different descriptions, is used in transactions between dealers and dealers, and larger payments from consumers to dealers, while another Another sort of currency, metallic coin, circulates in the retail trade. Although distinct, these two sorts of currency intermix with each other. Thus, gold coin, to a very great extent, circulates in even larger payments for all the odd sums under 5 pounds. If tomorrow 4-pound notes or 3-pound notes or 2-pound notes were issued, the gold filling these channels of circulation would at once be driven out of them and flow into those channels where they would be most needed from the increase of money wages. Thus, the additional million required by an advance of wages by 50% would be supplied without the addition of one single sovereign. The same effect might be produced without one additional banknote by an additional bill's circulation, as was the case in Lancashire for a considerable time. If a general rise in the rate of wages, for example, of 100%, as Citizen Weston supposed it to take place in agricultural wages, would produce a great rise in the price of necessaries, and according to his views, require an additional amount of currency not to be procured. A general fall in wages must produce the same effect on the same scale in the opposite direction. Well, all of you know that the years 1858 to 1860 were the most prosperous years for the cotton industry, and peculiarly the year 1860 stands in that respect unrivaled in the annals of commerce, while at the same time all other branches of industry were most flourishing. The wages of the cotton operatives and all other working men connected with their trade stood in 1860 higher than ever before. The American crisis came, and those aggregate wages were suddenly reduced to about 1/4 of their former amount. This would have been, in the opposite direction, a rise of 400%. If wages rise from 5 to 20, we say that they rise by 400%. If they fall from 20 to 5, we say that they fall by 75%. But the amount of the rise in the one and the amount of the fall in the other case would be the same, namely 15 shillings. This, then, was a sudden change in the rate of wages, unprecedented, and at the same time extending over a number of operatives, which, if we count all the operatives, not only directly engaged but indirectly dependent upon the cotton trade, was larger by 1/2 than the number of agricultural laborers. Did the price of wheat fall? It rose from the annual average of 47 shillings 8d per quarter during the 3 years 1858 to 1860 to the annual average of 55 shillings 10d per quarter during the 3 years 1861 to 1863. As to the currency, there were coined in the mint in 1861 $8,673,323 pounds against 3,378,792 pounds in 1860. That is to say, there were coined 5,294,440 pounds more in 1861 than in 1860. It is true the banknote circulation was in 1861 less by 1,319,000 pounds than in 1860. Take this off. There remains still a surplus of currency for the year 1861 as compared with the prosperity year, 1860, to the amount of 3,975,440 pounds, or about 4 million pounds. But the bullion reserve in the Bank of England had simultaneously decreased, not quite to the same, but in an approximating proportion. Compare the year 1862 with 1842. Apart from the immense increase in the value and amount of commodities circulated in 1862, capital paid in regular transactions for shares, loans, etc. for railways in England and Wales amounted alone to £320 million, a sum which that would have appeared fabulous in 1842. Still, the aggregate amounts of currency in 1862 and 1842 were pretty nearly equal, and generally you will find a tendency to a progressive diminution of currency in the face of enormous increasing value, not only of commodities, but of monetary transactions generally. From our friend Weston's standpoint, this is an insolvable riddle. Looking somewhat deeper into this matter, he would have found that quite apart from wages, and supposing them to be fixed, the value and mass of commodities to be circulated, and generally the amount of monetary transactions to be settled, vary daily. And the amount of banknotes issued varies daily. The amount of payments realized without the intervention of any money by instrumentality of bills, checks, book credits, clearing houses varies daily. That as far as actual metallic currency is required, the proportion between the coin in circulation and the coin and bullion in reserve or sleeping in the cellars of banks varies daily. That the amount of bullion absorbed by the national circulation and the amount being sent abroad for international circulation vary daily. He would have found that this dogma of a fixed currency is a monstrous error, incompatible with our everyday movement. He would have inquired into the laws which enable a currency to adapt itself to circumstances so continually changing, instead of turning his misconception of the laws of currency into an argument against a rise of wages.